How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Is that a drum in the background?
Yep.
Awesome. Who's the drummer?
Me.
Oh, yeah, you've been playing a while?
Yeah, I'm taking drum lessons.
Oh, cool. I'm a drummer too, so I have an electronic drum kit outside my office, so I hit it when I'm angry.
Cool. My dad has a guitar and bass back here too.
Oh, nice. Adam's a bass player.
Why don't we start with you introducing yourselves and how you got started in game design before moving on to your current stuff with Blacklist?
Sure. I'm Brady, Brady Sadler. I started off in game design through a weird combination of writing fantasy and playing heavy metal music. I was a drummer for a metal band, and I was writing a novel for it. Got really deep into fantasy because our music was all fantasy oriented. So, and that was when I was getting back into college and everything. So, after getting into writing, I started applying those skills to my hobby, which was gaming, slowly getting into like Warhammer, Dungeons and Dragons, and I started writing for Fantasy Flight Games, kind of freelance, and then I ended up getting a job there when I got out of college, so I wrote in their marketing department, and Adam can pick up his, because he got a job there after I did, and he was in production, and I kind of started leaning toward that way also. But Adam, you can go ahead and pick up from that point.
Yeah, I got my start when I was in college. I was working at a puzzle and game company called Mega Brands, and they needed to do a game design for an Avatar movie board game, and nobody there knew how to design games. So I played games a lot, so I volunteered. Yeah, I'll try my hand at it, and that was my first game design. And after that, I applied for a job at Fantasy Flight Games, and when I graduated college, I got a job there as a game producer, and after about a year, I got promoted to game designer after my work on Descent Second Edition. And so after worked at FFG for a while, then after leaving there, we kind of just picked up game design on a freelance basis, and that led to eventually getting full-time jobs here at Blacklist Games.
Did you submit Street Masters to Blacklist, or were they looking for designers and reached out to you? What's it been like working with them?
So with Street Masters, we had a mutual contact from other projects we worked on, but they approached us because they wanted a very specific game, because they had some art assets and they had an idea for this martial arts world they wanted to build, but they didn't have a game for it. So they reached out to me and Adam, and we were still just doing some freelance work at the time, and they pretty much gave us free reign about whatever we wanted to design. They wanted to have it martial arts themed, and Adam and I were really big into like Double Dragon, the video game, back when we were younger, and kind of those beat 'em up games. So we had a lot of inspiration from that, and we didn't really have high hopes for the game. We kind of just wanted to do something fun because it was still just kind of a hobby, you know. But yeah, it turned out to do really well. It's got a second print run now. Had an expansion that got $400,000 on Kickstarter, so it's been pretty well. But yeah, they approached us on that originally.
Street Masters, Brook City, and the upcoming Alter Quest all use the modular deck system. How did you come up with it, and what goes into testing the combos? How long does it take to design one of these games?
Adam, you can take that one.
So the modular deck system came from our desire to have a very highly replayable cooperative game experience with lots of different elements you can kind of sock it in and out. I remember a long time ago we played a game called Sentinels of the Multiverse, and that kind of tapped in that idea where we wanted to do something where we had these decks of cards that you could just swap in and out of different combinations to make your play experience, pretty much make your own scenarios. But we wanted more. We wanted miniatures and dice and more of a board gaming experience using those kind of modular deck elements. As far as playtesting goes, it's a very arduous process. There's a lot of combinations to go through, and obviously we can't catch everything in playtesting, especially with the game with this many variables. But we try to get as many playtesters as we can, have a wide playtesting pool, get a lot of feedback, and just play as much as possible. As far as the design, I think once we got into this groove of designing MDS games, they actually come together fairly quickly for us now, which is good. But like I said, it's really just the testing of all the different kinds of decks and combinations is what probably takes the longest.
Yeah, that's probably one thing Adam hates the most is because one of my favorite game mechanics or things in a game is having a character that's a deck of cards. I love playing games where it's deck driven and your character's all in this deck. And I don't necessarily like deck building though, so I don't like deck construction games like Magic the Gathering or these collectible card games. I do play some, but I like just having a deck I just grab, shuffle up, and go. So quick setup's very important to us. That's kind of what the kind of impetus behind the MDS system was originally.
Alter Quest will be on Kickstarter when this video goes live. Tell me about that game. Will we see anything from Lorengard in that?
That'd be awesome. So, Adam, you want to take the Alter Quest one? Or?
Yeah, Alter Quest is our most recent evolution of the MDS game system. It is a cooperative fantasy adventure board game. It is like a throwback to all our dungeon crawling games growing up, particularly games like Hero Quest. It was a big inspiration for us because that was our favorite game. That's what kind of got us into the hobby when we were kids. And so we wanted to make a game that kind of tapped into that feeling for us, but in a more modern, kind of more strategic game design. But also, we wanted to bring in those 3D elements that kind of set the stage for Hero Quest, kind of got you into the theme. And so Alter Quest features these 3D pieces, we call them features, but they have doors and alchemy desks and 3D altars that really makes the board stand out on the table. Nice centerpiece.
Yeah, as far as Lorengard goes, I'm not sure if we'll have any nuggets in there of Lorengard, but that's our old, for the people who don't get that reference, that's our old heavy metal band we were in. That was, I wrote a novel about it, but actually we're kicking around an idea about a novel for the world that Alter Quest is set in, so maybe we can get that going, because they're very different worlds, and we don't really like to cross streams with IPs when we can avoid it, especially when they're both fantasy. But thanks for the Lorengard reference.
Why do you like dungeon crawls so much?
That's a question for Adam, I think.
Yeah, I think that goes back to just my first experience with Hero Quest. I think that all the nostalgia really captures me. It attaches me to that kind of game. I always try to find the perfect dungeon crawl, but every time I get one, I'm disappointed in some way. It's not exactly what I wanted. That's kind of one of the reasons why we wanted to design Alter Quest. We wanted to kind of design what we want out of a dungeon crawl. And I think we got pretty close to exactly what I wanted in a dungeon crawl. But for me, I think it's the role playing aspect where you get to take the role of a hero, and you get to. I love miniatures. I'm a huge miniatures gamer. I buy tons of Warhammer models and I paint them all day. So that's a big draw for me is the miniatures. But yeah, I think that it all comes back to that game that got me into the hobby. That Hero Quest game, that kind of game is always close to my heart, I guess.
Yeah, it's a very visceral thing where a lot of people, I always hear negative connotations about it's just generic fantasy, another fantasy game, and fantasy's overplayed. But the bottom line is fantasy just speaks to a lot of people on very common ground, because I think it's just that whole might be partial nostalgia, but partial just that kind of traditional feel of fantasy, because there's so much of your childhood is usually built on these fantasy stories and everything. So I think fantasy it's going to affect lots more people than any other theme, I think. So that's kind of why I'm drawn to fantasy games. Adam's always been more into the kind of exploring the dungeon crawl aspect. A lot of dungeon crawls I've played, like Adam, I've had problems with. So we try to take what we kind of envision, what we would want out of a dungeon crawl with Alter Quest. So it's good to have both those perspectives, because Adam's had a lot more experience exploring different systems, dungeon crawls, and I usually play it with him, but I never think in that realm. So getting those two different viewpoints together creates something pretty cool.
What are your favorite bands?
Ooh, that's a good one. For me, I think my all-time favorite band would have to be they've changed their name so much, but they were at one point called Rhapsody. Now they're like Rhapsody of Fire or Luca Turilli's Rhapsody. But that was probably the biggest impact on me because I grew up. Adam and I both loved like Metallica and Megadeth, all the big thrash metal bands from the '80s. But it wasn't until I got into power metal, European power metal. It's like fantasy oriented, fantasy themed. That kind of just changed my whole direction and my interests in life and everything. So when I got into Rhapsody, I got into reading fantasy, writing fantasy. I got much deeper into gaming. So I think it's probably the most iconic band for me is Rhapsody. But I also love pretty much almost all power metal out there. I love like Hammerfall, Freedom Call. I can name them all day long, but those are the big ones.
Yeah, I think that I can always call back to the biggest inspiration was probably Metallica. When we first got into music, we played bands in high school and we just played Metallica songs all the time. So it's kind of stuck with me over the years. It's one of my favorite bands of my youth. But yeah, once we got into power metal, Brady got me into all those different bands that he liked. Falconer was one that stood up to me. Like that one was Falconer and Heavenly. I think were the two big bands that really stuck with me.
Yeah, I think the one most recently though I got was a band called Beast in Black. I think they're from Hungary. They're really catchy, kind of like synth pop power metal, like super 80s, super catchy, but still really thrashy. So that's a pretty fun band.
One last question. You two work very well together. How do you deal with arguments when designing?
Well, working well together is probably how it looks on the outside. But yeah, we do deal with a lot of arguments and bickering, kind of just really petty things because it's what brothers do. Luckily, we don't take that stuff too seriously. We just need to separate and get some air and everything. But we have very similar goals and similar mindsets of what we want. And I think the minor setbacks to that is you can always have different ideas out of how to get there, and that's where the arguments start. It's like they're just little tiny process arguments, but overall it works well because we want the same thing. Usually, we have the same interests, and mostly we've always had the same creative drive in whatever we're doing, music or games or writing, whatever it is. So,
yeah, I think what makes it easier is that, like you said, we have a common goal. Like we don't need to explain what we want out of a project. We both know what the goal is. So we do have the struggle of the brotherly arguments that brothers do. But when you're working with somebody else, you might not have the same mindset. A lot of times you struggle to find a common goal, and like that's the argument, and that's kind of more of a challenge. I think the personal squabbles are pretty easy to get over. You take a break, the next day you come back and you're over it. But the goal at the end of the tunnel, that as long as that's a shared vision, it's a lot easier to get there.
Thank you so much for doing this interview today with me.
No, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.